So we've talked about a lot of positive things here, but let's talk a little bit about scary stuff. So we're going to focus on cybersecurity and on some of the ways that quantum technology affects cybersecurity. So before we start, I just want to ask the audience, how many of you are worried that in your working career, quantum computers are going to break encryption? Maybe that's half. How many of you are worried that in your life they're going to steal your Bitcoin? Less people. All right. What number should that be? What percentage of the audience should that be, Michele?
That should be concerned. Anyone under the age of 90. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe by the end of this chat, it'll be 100%. So Michele is a leading researcher who's worked in, you've been in the field for about 30 years or so. So you've experienced the transition from basic research into the beginnings of the quantum technology industry that we have now. He was a co-founder of the Institute for Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo, where he's a professor, which was really one of the first forward-thinking quantum technology research centers. Thank you for that. That's helped everybody. And he's now the CEO at EvolutionQ, which is a portfolio company at Quantonation. So Michele, do you want to just say a few words about EvolutionQ, what you do, why you started it?
Sure. It's been quite a fun ride. For over 30 years, I've been working in cryptography and since 1996 in quantum computing. And I was always engaged with industry and government. And the company, so I was always consulting when asked, because as a professor, you're very good at telling other people what they should do. And then occasionally they actually listen, and then they would always ask for help. And so we were getting, asks for help that were too interesting to say no, but just too much and too complex to say yes to without a team. So there was one major government official once asked me, what should I do? And I told her, and she said, okay, let's do it. I said, great, we'll set up a meeting with your team and my team. And then, of course, I didn't have a team. So it was just me and Norbert. And so I started quickly assembling a team. And we started off as a professional services company to help people on the journey to be resilient. So you don't have to, I'm super excited. All we want to do is be able to boldly and excitedly harness all this value creation capability that quantum and AI enables. Right? And we don't want the threat of breaking the foundations of the digital economy to slow us down in idiotic, unnecessary ways. So we just want to enable that, right? And so we were helping people understand what this meant in risk language, evolve the roadmap, and then we realized, we need to not just be secure, we need to be resilient, right? Because this quantum threat, we can be laid back about it because we've known about it since 1994. But if you don't have a head start, it's really a game over. So we kind of are championing a new category of software products that allow you to, just like PKI enabled scalable security, symmetric key infrastructure enables scalable cryptographic resilience.
So say a little bit about what the threat to cybersecurity is from quantum.
Since the early 90s till now, up before the 90s, if you really cared about security of your information, and that was just a few players who did, somebody with a briefcase exchanged the keys, you use symmetric cryptography to encrypt and authenticate, right? And it was a tiny part of our economy. By the 90s, when banks and so on wanted to use the internet and global telecommunications as a business tool, right, we needed to secure it, right? Because the internet in the beginning, we didn't secure it because, the stakes just weren't high enough. The adversaries weren't capable and determined enough. But by the 90s, that started to change. And now pretty much most of the global economy fundamentally depends on trusting untrusted systems, which sounds idiotic. But the way we make untrusted systems trustworthy is through cryptography. And one of the most powerful tools that really enabled the last 30 years of economic growth is public key cryptography. Which is more sophisticated than just an encryption algorithm. But that extra sophistication comes with extra cryptanalytic code-breaking risk, which we knew about, and we were saying, hey, we need to worry about this, and almost nobody cared, right? Then Peter Shor showed us actually this quantum computer could break the public key cryptography that underpins everything, and I think most people don't get it. people still think, oh, it's about one state actor stealing secrets from another state actor. That's like the least of my personal, I mean, I'm not saying that's not a problem, but there's people who've got that covered. I'm worried about how it underpins the whole global economy, not just confidentiality, integrity, authenticity, availability of systems. I'm not worried about people stealing trillions of dollars. I mean, I'm worried. My biggest concern is shutting down the global financial system where you can't move your money around, right? And again, if somebody loses $1 billion, I'll feel really sorry for them, honest. But I'm more worried about what if, if we lose confidence in the global payment system, I really don't know how we recover as a society.
Well, that's pretty bad.
Is that scary enough? I don't. But this is actually a good story, good news story. We'll get to that. By the end.
There is. So, this is something that's debated a lot. But what do you think is the timeline to practical public key cryptography being broken by real quantum computers?
I think we need to change the language into risk language, because this is not like how many jelly beans are in the jelly bean jar, kind of who gets it right. It's about what's the chance, what's your risk tolerance, right? And the risk just goes up, right, toward 100%. So it's not like, oh, if we dodge the bullet, we're done. It's like, no, you're eventually going to get burned. So you got to do this anyway. The question is how urgently. And I'd say there's about a 10% chance in 5 years. And if you want to say, oh, no, it's 3%, okay. It doesn't fundamentally change what we need to do, but I think it's around the 10% chance, and it goes up to about 30 within 10 years. Now, so probably not, right? And there's a story that don't tell my wife, I've been telling you this, but one time one of the teachers at my kids' school took 20 kids to a park to play, and then 19 came home, right? And my wife was very upset and oh my God. And I said, well, actually it's 95%. Like that's pretty good. It's like an A+ at the university. But of course, so what matters is sometimes 5% is not an acceptable risk, and sometimes it is, right? And you really have to, in a risk-based way, decide how much protection do I need? Like we have MFA. We don't use 3 levels of MFA for every single thing we use. But for more critical systems, we do. For others, we have 2. For others, we have 1. For others, we're just ready to turn it on, right? But you got to manage it properly. So I think the risk is already too high. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can't go back in time. We can just go as quickly as we possibly can to mitigate the known threats. But very importantly, how do we avoid this idiotic situation ever again? Because the stakes are just existential. And we can't be just playing Russian roulette with something. It's something so easy to mitigate, but we're not. So I think we need to address the deeper question now in terms of how do we not just have hope, as our strategy, hoping that, we don't suddenly, the whole economy could be hostage to whoever happens to solve a math problem. And they have AI now to help them too. They have quantum computers to help them. We don't really know what they're good at. So trying to predict what codes can be broken or not you're not gonna, that's a very dangerous game. We do our best, but we need to be resilient.
And then if I hear you right, I mean, you're calling into question the whole basis for most of modern cryptography, which is that certain mathematical problems are hard to solve by computers. And we could switch that math problem from the one we have today that's factoring that we know quantum computers are good at to another math problem, but maybe we should take a different tack.
So I'm actually a huge champion of public key cryptography, but I'm also coming with a code breaking background, not so arrogant as to say, but trust me, like I've got it covered because I got all these theorems nobody can understand and so on. And as I'm taught a complexity, like it's a beautiful, powerful edifice. We absolutely should leverage it, but we should also acknowledge, but that rug could be pulled out from under us. And so all you need to do is reduce the impact of that unexpected break to be a small enough number so it's worth the bet, right? Because imagine if we hadn't leveraged public key crypto, if we hadn't trusted it in the 90s, we wouldn't have had most of the global economy right now. We would have lost all that wealth creation opportunity, right? So we just have to not be zero risk, but make sure the most catastrophic risks are not on the table anymore, and we just decide, how much we want to gamble. But it's got to be a survivable possibility. Because I'm confident that if a code is broken, we'll be able to fix it, but not if, the global economy's collapsed.
Right. Yeah, the time to fix might, if civilization comes down, then we're going to be in real trouble. So those risk numbers and timelines you're talking about, I mean, you partnered with the Global Risk Institute, you run these surveys. Can you just comment a little bit on sort of where some of those come from and where people can find more about that?
Like, I've been coming up with these estimates since 1996, where I said 0% chance in 20 years. So it's not always 20 years in the future. I said 0, but now I think it's like 80%, like it's high in 20 years. So I have my own methodology, but it's become completely unwieldy for me. Well, not completely, but it's really hard now. Because when I was doing it 10 years ago, I was roughly saying most of the probability mass is in superconducting qubits, and what's the likelihood of achieving, scalable, whatever that means, error correction by a certain date. And I looked at all the different, it's all the different exponential paths to having a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. Improvements in error correction, improvement in algorithmics. And even that was a kind of a hard thing to get my head around, but I really thought through it hard and I came up with my estimates. But now you have 6 platforms that are in the running. It's no longer that all the probability mass is in superconducting. There's still a lot of probability mass in superconducting being the ones to break it, but ion traps, neutral atoms just came up from behind. And then within the superconducting, there's the front-running platforms, but there's disruption within each category, right? We just heard from new players here. The spin-based approaches, photonic approaches, they're all serious players now. So it's a much harder task. So I still do my own personal estimations, but a few years ago I said, well, why don't I try to put myself out of business in terms of the prediction business? Let's see what 30, 40 of my most respected colleagues around the world think. The people who build them, the people who design them, the people who do error correction. And because nobody knows how hard it is more than them. So all things considered, considering all these moving parts, what do you think the chance is of all these pieces coming together within 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years? And I framed it as a probability question instead of give me a year where you think it's going to happen, because that doesn't help me manage risk. Because it's not like even odds with the global economy, right? So, and we take all the answers, and there's a spectrum. We give all the raw data, so you can say, I'm not going to trust the most optimistic 50%. Fine. Look at the most pessimistic 50%. Analyze it however you like. But if you kind of average those ranges we give you, it's you get numbers something like 6 to 14. I'm forgetting, sorry, the numbers, but 6 to 14% within 5 years, and 20 something, I think, to 34% in 10 years. So there's still a variance on that. The variance is coming down over time, and the mean is also getting shorter too.
Yeah, so it's not always the same distance of time away. We're actually getting closer.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I actually think is maybe not totally taken into account in these estimates is how this race is going to change when the industry gets properly funded. I mean, we're very excited about the 1 to 2 billion in private investments that started to go into quantum technologies about 3 years ago, but add that all up, your whole human history, and we're probably below 10 billion, which is how much Elon Musk gets when it's just him and like 5 guys saying they're going to do AI. And that's going to change. Yeah. Like once we get within, you pick your window, 4 years, a high confidence of these machines getting built, much larger checks are going to start showing up to make this happen. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's it's a nonlinear system, and that's one of the many factors we take into account. And we ask people about, what do you think the investments are going to be? There's all the geopolitical, there's a securitization that all impacts funding and how the science is done. And of course, commercially useful applications are another one. And we're really at the early days of seeing that across the quantum ecosystem. And that will, some people think, oh, but there's so much attention to AI that quantum might not get as much. But I think it's the opposite in that AI is only going to accelerate the development of quantum, the application of quantum, and those synergies. So it only exacerbates the need to be quantum ready.
So what do we do? This is pretty bad. What are the things people should be doing, and what are the technologies and products available to help?
So it's actually really easy to in terms of the code breaking capability. You know, one of the main points is cybersecurity is not actually a technology problem. The technology part's the easiest part. And that's because we're failing miserably at it, but not because of the technology. Because we're spending more and more money on cybersecurity and getting worse results. And so we're going up a down escalator. It's accelerating down. And like,
you just mean in general, not just quantum. You just mean like cybersecurity in general.
Cybersecurity, yeah. And you know, we're just coaching each other on how to run up an escalator faster. We're going to lose that game. So we really need a fundamental game changer with how we govern cyber risks, right? Because there's obviously some market failures, some externalities that are not being properly internalized when it comes to catastrophic cyber risk. And we urgently need to do something. And this is the happy part of the story. Quantum is potentially the wake-up call, because it's shining a light on this, what I call a market failure, but this really failure in how we govern risk as companies and as countries. It's shining a light on it and maybe giving us a fighting chance to say, wait a minute, how could we have been so stupid here? And then say, well, what else do we need to do to fix the problem? Because if all we do is put a Band-Aid and say, oh, look, lattices are not broken as far as we know, like we've lost, because it's really a blessing in disguise. So, you know, let's not blow it and think that just putting a Band-Aid on Shor's algorithm is the solution. We need to properly not just architect for security, but we have to architect for resilience. Like companies, like it's in there everywhere else, right? You can't, as a global enterprise, buy a solution that only has one vendor. Absolutely, you would get like annihilated by your board and your risk committee if you went with a solution that only had one company selling it. How could you be so idiotic? You would not get away with it, right? But so we're worried about vendor concentration risk. We're worried about all these supply chain, blah, blah, blah. But then all the suppliers are using the same cryptographic algorithms. So whoever can break that code owns all of those. Like, you can pretend to be, you can compromise all those supply chains. You can take down those systems in so many different ways. And we're like, you know, call us when that happens. Of course, then it's way too late to do anything about it. So we really need to, and we know how to do it. We just need boards, governments, customer, end users to say, hey, I want a resilient internet, not just a secure and cheap one. And if there is a security and resilience by demand imperative, which requires, I think, everyday citizens and so many different players to demand it, then we can deliver it on the technology level. I can tell you how. Like, so the technology, that's what I do, but we know how to do it. It's not rocket science. 3 simple steps, right? And we do it for so many other things. If you're going to rely on a new technology, you should know what happens if it's broken, right? Like, what happens if the brake on your car goes? It's bad, right? That's why you have an emergency brake. But you kind of know things that could go wrong. You know the business impact of that tool being broken, because it could be. Like the we have a good asymptotic theories that they're all, you know.
I think maybe it's good to say,
Yeah.
I think so there are these NIST standards that have come out recently. It's a long program, great mathematicians working on it, but a small community that are suggesting new cryptographic algorithms that we believe are resistant to quantum computers. And so some folks might think, well, we'll just switch out RSA for those and we'll be okay. And you're saying that's just it's basically punting the problem.
Like,
sort of.
absolutely do that ASAP. Like, do not delay that another moment. We should be demanding resilience against known threats, right? But I mean, we also have to say, what if next time we don't know about it in advance, or 20 years in advance? So that's where we need resilience. So I've done a lot in PQC. Started the Open Quantum Safe platform. It's now part of Linux. I mean, we're both big supporters of open source. So we've done a lot to get that show on the road and still do a lot. But we also need to design the brakes and airbags to go with that.
So how does EvolutionQ's products and steps kind of play into being more resilient?
So our services are really meant to make that journey as simple, painless, and cost-effective as possible. Like, we don't have time to waste money on theater or stuff that doesn't actually help, right? So we don't want you to waste time. So we're very pragmatic about that risk. Just accept it, because why migrate a system you're going to deprecate in 10 years anyway if, if you do, if it's a risk you can accept. So we're very pragmatic, prioritize what you need to migrate when, how to go about engaging with your vendors on that journey. But there was no defense in depth. There was no defense in depth category, because we architected, again, in the beginning, internet had no security really. Then we made it secure but not resilient. In order to make it resilient, you need, so step one, understand, what it is. Then you have to be able to, convince yourself that if it does happen, it's a recoverable event and you recover quickly. So you need cryptographic diversity, and I don't mean 20,000 different kinds of weird ad hoc crypto nobody understands. I mean 2 or 3, right, different categories of method. It's like multi-factor authentication. It's kind of obvious there. You don't want to, you can't have the same factor twice, right? And maybe you can have 2 cell phone numbers, but it's better if you have 2 or 3 very different authentication modalities, right, to give you that resilience. So if one is broken, the other 2 can keep things operating while you fix whatever happened to that other one. We need to do the same thing with our public key infrastructure. And the only way, to get scalable, resilient solutions, you need what we're calling symmetric key infrastructure, which is kind of going back to the 80s. Because the way we used to do it before public key cryptography made it so much easier and elegant is pre-shared keys and symmetric cryptography. A bit of a pain to scale. You can, but public key cryptography is so much better, so we did it. But if we need resilience, well, let's take that old school stuff, architect it for the 21st century. So we developed a way to do that, all standards-based. It's all open, so people can scrutinize it. And there's a few other, partners, competitors, I would say, who are trying to do the same thing, and that's all good. And of course, we have quantum networks, go where the puck is going. Right? We're going to have one of the wonderful things the quantum networks we heard about earlier are going to enable is more and more end-to-end key exchange that can't be mathematically broken. So it's great that it's different from public key cryptography and so on. So we've architected it so it weaves together elegantly into a symmetric key infrastructure where the end user doesn't know or care whether it was a pre-shared key symmetric key solution or QKD. Just like when you use the internet, you don't care if it's copper, wireless, or fiber. Somebody cares, but the e-commerce, the end users are just happy they have this interoperating platform that continues to get better as new technologies emerge. So we have this symmetric key infrastructure, classical software solution. For the quantum hardware, if you're going to use it, we rely on the great ecosystem of vendors that are emerging and we want this to be one of the first use cases that drives that ecosystem. And where there isn't a quantum network, well, we have non-quantum solutions building on old school, tried and tested systems.
So how does the risk and mitigation approach change when you're not thinking about a centralized system like a stock exchange or a bank, but instead a decentralized system like blockchain systems?
It changes it, but there really should be more effort by that community, which has a lot of money in their pockets and at stake, to dig deeper there. But at a high level, I've worked on this, wrote a white paper on it. So you can roughly separate it into new blockchains or distributed ledgers. You can make them quantum safe from the outset. Okay. The challenge there is, of course, use post-quantum signatures and be ready to change those signatures in case there's a break. But signatures, especially if you use the more paranoid hash-based signatures, are much less risky cryptographically because they don't have all the trapdoor predicate structures of key exchange algorithms. So you have to change your signatures. But then you have to ask yourself, so if your blockchain is 10 times bigger, is that a problem? Right? You have to look at the performance factor of the new signatures. And in some cases, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Other places, it's a big deal. Some of the blockchains, distributed ledgers, use sort of really fancy, and I don't mean that pejoratively, like really cool new cryptographic tools like aggregate signatures, which don't have, post-quantum or similar post-quantum plugins. So then what? If they're broken, then what's going to happen to your platform? So you have to, so ones that use those, we don't have a post-quantum equivalent. But if all you need is signatures and hash functions, then we know how to do it. There's also the problem of how do you change the wheels on the bus while you're driving it? Right. So how are you going to upgrade the Bitcoin, system in real time? One of my former students wrote a paper suggesting it'll take 300 days of downtime to update Bitcoin, which you're like, really? Like that would be a big problem. And I think we need to be proactive. First, is that true? Can we avoid that? How? But I think people relying on blockchains and distributed ledgers, investing in them, need to ask these questions and get smart technology people to give them satisfactory answers. Like
Great.
hope and luck, not the ideal strategy if so much of as an increasing amount of our economy starts to depend on this.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Michele. He's going to be around.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks to Quantonation.